Hello, everyone. I'm Keith DeStone, and I'd like to welcome you back to the Harvard University Cosmos Society online open house series, a venue that's meant to bring current researchers into conversation with the broader CHS community. Our guests today, we have two guests, Jeff Rusten, Emeritus Professor and twice former Chair of the Department of Classics at Cornell, as well as former Director of Graduate Studies in the Graduate Program in Theater. He has a number of teaching and publication achievements to his name. His research specialties include Thucydides, Athenian comedy, especially the fragments of comic authors other than Aristophanes, the one that we all know, also tragedy and the Athenian tragic theater. Accompanying Jeff is Ethan Della Rocca, who is a current graduate student at Cornell in Greek and Latin philology, focusing on ancient letters, letter collections, and the prose works of Seneca the Younger. Ethan also has a secondary research interest in digital humanities, and several years ago was a digital humanities intern at our own CHS. We have a lot to cover today under our heading of the Lexeis project, the great Greek author-lexica of the 19th century, Thucydides, Plato, Aristophanes, and soon to come Aristotle, made easier to use and with added content on the web. So I'm going to turn things right over to the two of you. Thanks for joining us.
So I'll go first if that's all right, Ethan. Yeah, okay. Thanks. Saying Ethan's helping me is not quite right. Ethan's explaining to me what he's doing, and I am reacting to it is quite often the case. Let's see. So I wanted to start by sharing a screen just to remind me of what our structure is, if I may. And let's see if this works. Can you all see the screen now with a kind of a rough outline?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay, good. I wanted to start out by saying it's not even on here, that but I in particular have done a number of screencasts. I don't know how many of you have had a look at those screencasts. It wasn't required, but if you haven't, that's fine. Has anyone looked at them yet? No?
I looked at.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah, so I did as well.
Okay, I did that because they are all organized, and with some few exceptions, they don't make mistakes, and they tell you everything I think that's needed to know. And so if you want to get an introduction to the whole project, that's the place to go. And so if you looked at them and have some questions on them, I'd like to talk about them today. But I also can direct you to the screencasts. There's three of them on Thucydides, which introduce the whole kind of project in three different aspects. And then there's one of them on Plato, which talks about the particular problems and advantages of Plato. And then there's another one which is posted on our current project, Aristophanes. So that's the orderly presentation. Today, in an open house, we're going to be doing a little bit of talking about some things, but try to get your ideas on what you think is unclear or maybe problematic or interesting and want to know more about. And so we'll try to react to your own ideas, and don't hesitate to interrupt with questions anytime. So I want to start out by saying this talk it's all up there on the screen. You can read it for yourself. But first of all, this talk does have lots of Greek. I'm sorry about that, but I'm not sorry about that at all. But I hope you all are interested in Greek too, because that's mainly what we're doing. And second, there are lots of other very good ways to study Greek words, some of which we have exploited in this project. The TLG is obviously the best known, along with Perseus. We owe our existence to Perseus materials. There's two other ones that are independent. A very new one called Diaeresis, which is a very good way to search Greek vocabulary. You can just look up Diaeresis on the web. You can download that to your computer. It's very simple to read. And then Diogenes, which is also downloadable on the web. You can look that up too. We could talk about the pros and cons of those, but they're all very good, and they all cover the entire corpus of Greek. That's one other thing. And then another proviso is that this project, and I think Ethan would certainly agree with me, does not set out to do something and do it perfectly and then go on to the next thing and do that perfectly and then go on to the next thing. What we do is kind of put together what we want to do. We do it in outline and show that it can be done. And we put online a kind of a proof of concept that we can use ourselves. And then we move ahead to the next page to see if we can do it there too. And then to the next phase in the same way. So it's a project that leaves behind much detail that still has to be done at each phase, but it's usable. And we'll try to show you some places where it is highly usable and some places where it still needs some tweaks and still, especially corrections, manual corrections. And one of the nice things about the way the project is set up digitally is that you can intervene and make some of these corrections yourself if you want to. Okay, so that's it. And then, so I'm going to start out by talking why a single author lexicon. And I don't really need to show my screen so much for this. So what I wanted to start out by saying is, almost everybody who uses a lexicon uses it for the whole Greek corpus, right? When you look up a word, you really look to turn to Little and Scott and want to look it up there because that gives you the most comprehensive definition. The other extreme is that you look it up just for your own author and you do a vocabulary list. And so there are vocabulary lists or glossaries, you might call them, that would help you with the words. Oh, so there's a whole series of very useful ones that are running vocabularies, say to one book of the Iliad or one play of Euripides or something like that. And it has the running vocabulary down at the bottom. And of course, digitally, there's the Atticus, the wonderful Atticus app. I don't know if you're familiar with that. You can download it to your phone, read almost any Greek text of the classical period, and click on the word and get a parsing of it and a definition. That's the other way I think most people read Greek, and Perseus does that among many other things. What I was interested in, this all came out of an argument I was having with Helm Medik about the vocabulary of Thucydides versus Herodotus. I was astonished to learn that they both have the same number of words pretty much in their works. And I thought, no, I know Thucydides the way he writes, and I know Herodotus the way he writes. Herodotus have a much bigger vocabulary than Thucydides. Thucydides has recurring concepts and words all the time. And she said, nope, they have about the same size vocabulary. And that started me working with her database and talking to other people and trying to figure out how you would answer this question, how you would characterize the different vocabularies and why that can be. I think I know now why that can be, and we can talk about it later. I'm not wrong that they use words very differently and their vocabulary choices are very different. But in another way, technically, they do have the same vocabulary size. So that got me started on looking at a single author. And you may know that the most famous ancient scholar of Homer, Aristarchus, had this rule about Homer. You interpret Homer from Homer. In other words, you don't bring in external details, and also you don't bring in external vocabulary. You look at Homer himself, and for that reason, of course, the major single author who gets lexica is Homer. There are many of them available. There's two major ones right now, Autenrieth and Cunliffe, and I'm sure there'll be many more. So there's no need to, and they, strangely enough, they aren't primarily in digital format yet. Although there was the University of Northwestern University and Perseus Chicago had a very nice vocabulary of Homer online, may still be online. It's been online for a decade or more. But what you can learn from a single author is what's called a corpus linguistics. The corpus of a single author is assumed to be relatively coherent. And what you can learn from it is how the author uses the same word in different parts of the work, of his corpus. So prepositions, a usage of prepositions. There will be a limited number of usages of the preposition. You encounter one that seems very odd, chances are the author is going to use it again. And by having all those examples together, you can figure out more precisely what it means. Thucydides, this works great for Thucydides. Thucydides is extremely eccentric in his choice of vocabulary and in his syntax, but he's also extremely consistent. So if you can keep the examples in your head, even these things that appear absolutely impossible to interpret in Thucydides, in fact, begin to make sense. And that's been my whole approach to studying Thucydides. There are other things you can do with an author corpus. If you want to investigate the genuineness of works, you can investigate it that way. And there's even a nice book, which I will try to show you. See if I can share a screen again. It's a general book. Here you go. It's Nabokov's favorite word is mauve. It's kind of an odd title, but it's a book about how you use computers in particular and statistics to determine things about an author's work that you want to know. His primary example is the Federalist Papers, to determine the authorship of the Federalist Papers, which was done by statistics. But he also looks at a whole lot of other problems. And this is before the days of large language models that we have today, but it's the similar kind of statistical problems. And it's a very entertaining book. The author in my period, in our period, classical period, that is most worked on this way is Plato, of course. But the question, people try to answer questions about Plato that are a lot more complicated than the ones this book deals with. And they also have a more complex corpus to deal with because, of course, it's a whole bunch of different works rather than one single work. And it does have different speakers throughout it. Anyway, so what makes a good and a bad author corpus or an author lexicon? First of all, it's a true lexicon if it's good. In other words, it's not an index. It doesn't just list all the forms, which many things call themselves a lexicon, and they don't give you any meaning. So they're not a lexicon at all. So it will give you the meanings of the words, but it'll go beyond that, and it'll give you an analysis of the different usages of the word. So in Greek, for example, with a verb, how is it used in the active versus the middle? What objects does it take? Does it take objects at all? What kind of subjects does it take? And then you try to find key passages. Where are some Greek authors are very good in defining the words for you. Thucydides is wonderful this way. He likes to say something is this and not that, which is extremely useful to the lexicographer to have the antonym right in front of you. But Plato will do that too. Many authors will do that. So 5 or 6 key passages will do a lot more toward defining a word than just a list of meanings. And then also you want to give some subsidiary information. You want to maybe talk about the word families or the semantic fields. So we'll talk about word families a little bit later, but words for the same family. Actually, this is the key. This is the key to my question about Herodotus versus Thucydides. Herodotus has a huge number of word families in his work, words from different stems. Whereas Thucydides has a huge number of words, but many of his words are from the same word family. When he wants to talk about justice, he has 3 different ways of saying justice. But they're all the same. They're all very similar in meaning. So that's an important thing. And actually, by the way, for word families, we'll see he's not very interested in decay. So if you decide to study decay in Thucydides, you'll say, boy, that's a disappointment. But if you look up adikia, he's very interested in that, injustice. So if you miss out on word families, you miss out on a lot of semantic interpretation. And semantics is another aspect. If you can divide things by semantic categories and put them in that way, that's extras. And that we're committed to trying to provide that in our lexicon, which goes better in digital. So those, and then one other main thing, a good lexicon will include all the words in an author. and it will include all the instances of all the words in an author in its analysis. And that seems obvious to us, but in fact, it's rather difficult. Most lexica do not. Most lexica of ancient Greek. So, for example, are you going to include "ha"? Are you going to include the article? Are you actually going to write a definition of the article that categorizes all the different occurrences of the article in your author? I don't think anybody's done that. I don't think a single lexicographer has done that yet. Not even the one who's most praised for single author lexica is the lamentable Enoch Powell, who did a wonderful lexicon to Herodotus. As Helma Dieck pointed out to me, then he did not use, when he did a translation of Herodotus, he did not use the definitions in his own lexicon. He used biblical language when he wanted to translate. But even he did not include all the occurrences. But many people leave out all the common words, like all the prepositions. Oh, they're easy. Everybody knows prepositions. No, they're some of the hardest things about an author. The kai and de and men and gar, all of those things, you really have to have them included because that's what you're going to have questions about. They need analysis. So that's been an eye-opener for us, I think. Which authors decide that this is important and which authors do not. So anybody who includes all those things gets a lot of credit. So that's the introduction to the topic. Now I think I'll turn it over, if I haven't overused my time, to Ethan to talk about the way we constructed one particular lexicon, the lexicon of Plato. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so I will be giving some sort of overview of more of the technical aspects for how this project has been constructed and how we built the Plato lexicon. And as Jeff already mentioned, we are heavily indebted to the Perseus project and to Helma Dieck for the resources that she's provided. And I'll start by showing an image that, for those of you that were able to look at the screencasts, should be a bit familiar. But this is what asked looks like in printed form. So this is part of the definition for agathos. And it's not exactly the most conducive thing for reading. When we were doing our own corrections and going through the text, it was very difficult, I think, to extract much use from the information that was presented when it's presented like this. But that doesn't mean there isn't useful information in the lexicon itself. And what we've done is we have attempted to convert a dictionary that's has very little structure or organizational structure on a visual level into something that is more easily understandable for the user. So by comparison, this is what agathos looks like on Lexeis. So as you can see, what we have done is we've broken down the different sub-definitions that are present in the standard printed form of the text and have separated them out so that while the content is still there, it's now actually easily accessible and readable. You may also notice that we have not included the quotations of the different citations, which for the most part are generally included by AST, although not all of his citations are followed by quotations. And this is for two reasons, as I'll talk about in a little bit. There's still more correction to be done, especially corrections surrounding these citations. And secondly, from the perspective of readability, we generally found that not including the quotations made it both readable while also not necessarily inaccessible because all of these citations are hyperlinked. So you can take yourself to the text just by clicking on a citation. The word that you were looking up in particular will be highlighted and you can see exactly what the context is that AST was originally citing. And beyond that, there are some other features for the lexicon that I believe Jeff will talk about later. But what I also want to show a little bit more is what the underlying technology here is. So our lexicon, when preparing it to be put into a live version, exists as an XML file. XML is a markup language to essentially indicate what portions of a text are significant in different ways. And this is standard with the Perseus project. So most of the text that you'll read on the Perseus sites, for example, are all ultimately coming from these XML files. So what we have done is we've created mostly preliminary or needing to still be edited XML files for the lexicon itself. So as an example, here we can see that same agathos entry, except in our XML formatting. And now we've once again entered the realm of less readable, but the purpose here is that this is for the computer and for the machines to read as opposed to human consumption. And what we've done is we've broken down the different sub-definitions into their own parts, which are separated out like this. So an initial definition followed by different types of sub-definitions, depending on how asked would create those sub-definitions, for example, with asterisks. And what you may notice is that much of the actual text that's in the quotations, which again are not currently included on the live site, are still in need of correction. And this is a process that we will be circling back to and have begun that process somewhat already, but this is a more laborious process. So as an example of where this may go, we can take a look at a different article. So this would be the XML for something like Zamia. This is how it exists in its uncorrected state. So here we have our initial definition, which exists at the beginning here, this castagio hic poena molia, and then our quotes, which are for the most part uncorrected. But due to our recent use, I guess, of a relatively new tool, which I'll talk about more later, called Transcribus, we've now been able to get extremely accurate OCRs of the text itself, which has allowed for us to begin the process of doing some automatic corrections to correct most of the issues that we have. And those sorts of corrections result in the following sort of structure, where we still have the same definitions and everything else, but the Greek as well is now, for the most part, corrected and perfectly serviceable. And this is the next step that we'll be taking when it comes to the preparation of the text, to get a final product that is more completely accurate in representing asked lexicon. And so that's one side of the project, is the lexicon, how it's structured and what we've been doing to make those structures. But the second side that I'll talk about, and this is more of what we are indebted to when it comes to the Perseus projects, is the actual database for how everything runs kind of under the hood. So when we get to the live site itself, essentially what is happening is there is a large database that contains all of the dictionary information. And this is one of the tables on the database. So our backend is structured using PHP, and everything else exists, and the actual data itself exists in a SQL database. Perhaps the most important of our tables is this table that I'm showing right now, the lemma table. So here we have every single lemma that exists in Plato. And this table contains a certain amount of information about that each lemma. So for example, if we go down to agathos, we have the nice short definition of agathos as good. The longer definition is stored somewhere else, which I'll show in a second. But we also have other information stored about the word as well. For example, the semantic group. So this is placed in the judgment and morality group. The root information is, unfortunately, as it's structured, not very readable, but you'd be able to see that on the definition itself. And we also have frequency information, and then what I've found at least most exciting recently, collocation information. So this is the result of mostly one of the undergraduates that was working on the project recently, who has gathered up collocation information for each lemma as it appears specifically within the Platonic corpus at different degrees of collocation. So directly with neighbors, words that appear not necessarily directly next to the lemma, but nearby, and then words that frequently appear within the same sentence. And this is part of the process that the tool set that we're trying to create, whereby Lexeis can serve as a tool for author-specific research into the use of language. So this is the main sort of database that we have, where we have these different lemmas with the basic information. The lemma tables here are connected to other tables, and I'll just highlight one other. So the other table, which does take a second to load, is our long definition table. And this is where the actual text from the lexicon itself is stored. So this is the place, for example, with agathos, the actual entry exists. I have to expand it somewhat so we can see, but the entry itself exists in the database in this sort of format, as well as some other computer legible formats. And it's through this sort of connection process that we're able to end up building the system whereby we can link together ASC definitions with the text that's been lemmatized of the Platonic corpus. So I think that's the basic overview of how we get the structure that we have for the most part. If there's interest, I can talk about what the XML text look like for the actual Platonic corpus itself, what it means to have the apology in XML, for example. But at the risk of not being too technical for the moment, I think I may pass it off back to Jeff at this point to talk more about the functions of Lexeis.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I speaking as a non-technical person here, by the way, Ethan's heard this a dozen times, but years ago when Perseus just started out and I was in the vicinity, I wanted not to be intimidated by people who did computers. So I took some time out from my teaching and took an evening course at Salem State in computer science. To give you some idea how long ago that was, the language was Fortran, and it was punch cards. And I was pretty happy. I got a B. And so ever since then, I felt, oh, I can handle this, but only on a very basic level. And I try to translate this into other things. Actually, Ethan, if you could just put up the XML again, do you still have that?
Yeah, 1 second.
I think you can what I do is I transfer this into, yeah. What I think of this as ring composition, basically. I mean, because that's the whole principle beside XML is everything has an opening ring and a closing ring, and the computer has to be reminded, now we're going to this and now we're stopping this, and sometimes it's within and sometimes it's not within, and so all of those, it doesn't really matter what words you use in those brackets. What matters is that the brackets are in the right order. So it's an old principle, and it works very well. And you can also, you can dispense with all of these brackets and just turn it into a nice web page. Thanks, Ethan. And so, as far as the other database goes, I just think of that as a very fancy form of Excel. And you can do wonderful things with it. And actually, that's what I do my work with. I do instead of trying to fiddle with the SQL database, which we've been given. By the way, we didn't put together that database. Helmadique has done that, and she is. I can't say enough about her, what she's done. I mean, she has parsed every single word of classical Greek, and it's almost all correct. I mean, 1 out of every 10,000 occurrences of a word is going to be wrong. She once told me that you haven't really parsed the text until you look at a tone, and you need to know not only it is a genitive plural, but you need to know whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter. And so that's the standard of correctness that she insists on. And so this is a real great basis for us to work with, because it gets rid of all this problem of, oh, can I think of all the occurrences of this verb and I have to search for all of them? Most of the sites try to do that. They so-called lemmatize, put it into lemmas, but Perseus Chicago does it absolutely right. TLG has some problems that way, but she does it great. Anyway, that's a little bit of a digression. I wanted to show you some of the sample lemmas that we've been looking at, where people have, let's see, people have done work that benefits from this kind of tool, not from our tool necessarily, but we can reproduce their work. And by the way, I should mention the technology behind this. Ethan is great at it. I mean, he can do much more advanced things in this, in particular with Python. But the technology behind this is pretty much resolutely 1990s, early 2000s, which means it's not cutting edge, but it means it's not so expensive. The server on which all this sits costs $50 a year. And we couldn't do that if we were doing cutting edge things. So, and also a lot of people know how to do it, but very few of them combine. Actually, we have a lot of students working on our project, but the Python language is great, and I certainly can't do it. But knowing Greek, and also in one case knowing German or knowing advanced Latin, adds a whole other level of demands on the worker's skills. So having all of those together is really quite challenging. Well, let me just start up here. I need to look at some.
Jeff and Ethan, I wonder if we could pause here for maybe questions, if there are any.
Yeah, please.
I say that because I have one, but I do also want to yield to anyone who has another question.
And I'll look up a web page while you're doing that.
All right, great. I'm looking for raised hands. But okay, well, I'll go ahead with mine, which is just, could you talk more about what these collocations are that, Ethan, you were mentioning?
Yeah, Ethan, you want to do that?
That wasn't quite clear to me. Yeah, what is?
Because that's the newest and potentially the closest to cutting edge that we're doing.
Yeah. So the collocations, how we structured them is, so we take the lemmatized form of the text essentially, and we're looking at closeness and placement of different words.
I'll look at Plato. Well, you tell me what to look up in Plato, and we'll.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, any word will have the collocation information. This is something that we've only just recently actually implemented, and the standard that we used was looking for direct neighbors that are repeatedly used. So, for example, if we're looking at agathos, what words appear most commonly directly next to this word? So, if we're thinking of in terms of n-grams, if this is a 2 gram. What are our most common 2 grams? And we have certain limits as opposed to you need a base level of occurrences in order for this to appear, which I can talk about as well. The nearby collocations, this is a similar sort of search, but instead of saying I'm only looking at the immediate neighboring words, either one before or one behind, there's a wider range which we can tweak as to how many words we're looking for. And then sentence collocation is a little bit different than this as well. So our way of dealing with that is defining the sentence itself, which we can do with how the text is structured, and then just looking for the most common words that appear in the same sentence as whatever lemma that we're looking up. This allows for a sort of kind of different approach than looking at nearby collocations, because the way that we've structured our data, at least, we don't tend to cross sentence boundaries. So the placement of a word in a sentence might mean that we're looking ahead more than we're looking behind. And sentence collocation is one way of kind of casting a broader net. While we don't present exactly the technical aspects on the website, the point is to give researchers a basic idea of what's the type of vocabulary that we expect to see around a given lemma.
Mm-hmm. And you should mention that this is produced. This does resemble cutting edge, artificial intelligence in one respect, in that it is produced by the computer.
Yes.
We don't look this up and enter this. For every word, it looks at the corpus of Plato and decides which words these are. So this overlap here is not our doing. It's not an artificial human-made overlap.
Yeah.
So you could. I don't know, any word you might want to look up in Plato, either in English or in Greek, that just to see what words were there. I don't know. How about idea for form? Okay. You can, Idea, let's see what there is there. Oh, well, okay. Artios, what has Artios got to do with Idea? Artios means close packed, right? It means apt. Dokeo hekastos. Well, that's odd. Okay. So anyway, you can look at all of these. By the way, anybody can use this site. You don't have to register or anything like that. If you want to go to the site, if you haven't seen the overlap, if you haven't seen the screencast, you just go to lexeis.org. And well, wait a minute. You go to lexeis.org and just that. And there you get all three authors. You get Thucydides, Plato, and Aristophanes. And you can choose which one you want. So for Thucydides, for example, some of the results, there are three, when you can, if you, most people will want to search, but you can also use a word list or view the text. So if for example, you're searching for a word and you think you might be spelling it wrong, like Thucydides instead of xun says xun. So if you're looking up for xun, and that's in Perseus, that's under a sigma, so you won't get it. So you would go to the word list and look for that and find it that way. But if you just want to search, so for example, kindunos meaning danger. Kindunos, here you have three panels. We deliberately give as little information as possible at the beginning, so you're not overwhelmed with it. So there are three panels, just the word, just a short definition, and then the number of occurrences. But if you want more information, the short definition turns into a definition from Béton's lexicon to Thucydides, a Latin definition. This whole lexicon was given to us by Greg Crane, who also likes Thucydides very much, you may know. And so he actually got it digitized once. Like us, the quotes were difficult for them to correct, so they just left them out. And so here's the definition of kindunos. And there's the semantic group, military and conflict. If you go up here, kindunos, you notice it doesn't have collocations yet, only Plato does. But here, if you go to kindunos, you'll discover we have a context occurrence. Doesn't tell you, for Thucydides, it's important to figure out, does this word occur in speeches? Does it occur in narrative, or does it occur in authorial passages? And because it wasn't too hard to add that, we just marked up those kinds of passages, which scholars are in agreement on. And so you can discover, and somebody else had discovered this just before us, that in fact, kindunos, look where it occurs. Look where it occurs most. Not in the narrative, but in the direct speeches. You would not expect the word for danger to occur more in speeches than in the narrative, right? And there's actually much more in the narrative because, of course, there's 5 times as much narrative in Thucydides as there is speeches. So that's very significant that Thucydides doesn't talk about danger himself so much. He talks about, his speakers talk about danger. So it's an evaluation word. And here's the article about it by that came out just recently, 2019, about narrator language and character language in Thucydides. They put together pretty much what we've got here, but just for themselves, and then they came up with this narrative. Another way you can use this for Thucydides is if you look up the word for it is necessary. If you look up cray, 2 words for it is necessary. Cray in Thucydides. Here you go. There's another, by the way, the occurrences are also here. You can, under the total number of occurrences, you get a list by passage, but you can also look in context. And here you look, the word cray occurs in many more times in the speeches than in the narrative, right? So if something is necessary, and it's necessary for people to tell each other it's necessary, in other words, it's got a persuasive component, you're trying to impress on somebody that it's necessary, you would use it cray. But the other one, day, if you go to day, and you look at that one, it is necessary. That's much more in the narrative. Actually, not much more, but still more in the narrative than in the speeches. So it's almost like day is a word that's more matter of fact for what has to be done technically, and whereas if you're saying of these different courses of action, this is what you must do, that's the other one. So this is a very interesting distinction in Thucydides' vocabulary. Another thing you can do about Thucydides with a lexicon is you can add illustrations. So there's a word in Thucydides for a kind of attachment to a trireme, very technical word. The Corinthians attached some sideways battering rams jutting out of the bows of their triremes so that they could ram up enemy ships just by going head at them. The Athenians were so clever, they could get alongside your ship and ram you alongside. And they would destroy you that way. The Corinthians were not good enough to do that. So they said, well, we'll just put this contraption on the fronts of our ships, and we will be able to ram people just by going straight ahead at them, which anybody can do. And so that word, what they put on their ships is called an ear. It's called a set of ears, ears upon the bow. So that's the word epotides. This is the word epotides. It only occurs 3 times in Thucydides, and it means beams projecting like ears on each side of a ship's bows. Extremely technical, but in fact, a lexicon should be able to tell you that we have an illustration of this. Here's a vase. Here's a vase, a rhyton from southern Italy. They like to make them in different shapes, like horses and cows and things like that. Well, here's one in the shape of a trireme. It has the front of a trireme here. You can see there's the trireme and there's the battering ram down here. And here alongside the handles, beneath the handles, it has these 2 external ears, which is what the Corinthians put on their ships so that they could hit the Athenians from the front and damage them. And here we can add bibliography about it. So you can't do this in a normal lexicon, but when you're online, you can add anything you want. Another example, for example, in Bust, what you can do, let's go to the Aristophanes, that lexicon. Go way back, come on. There we go, one more. There, lexicon to Aristophanes. That's what we're doing next. And if you want to search for, okay, the preposition epi, my favorite preposition, because in the 5th century, it was very much expanded. It had too many uses before the 5th century. And in the 5th century, it's used a lot in Thucydides and Aristophanes. Wust, the lexicon we're transcribing, has a full article on epi. It's in German. And Ethan will talk about how we're trying to bring this back from the dead. It was never published. We have photos of the manuscript. We're transcribing it and publishing it. So here's the German. Here's the German of it. And you see how much detail there is. There's a lot of X's here because we can't transcribe it all yet. But look at how much detail he gives on all of this, right? But it's in German, right? So look what you can do on the web. There it is in English. Okay, right alongside of it. You don't have to choose one or the other. And this, it's not, it's just, I've just translated the first part, but you can see that Wust is very modern in this respect. It's really like a Liddell and Scott for Aristophanes. It gives you first of place, then of resting on, and then he gives you proximity. And then he has movement and so on, and then he goes down to the dative and the accusative and so on like this. So if you're an expert on Aristophanes, you really want this lexicon, and it was never published either. So Ethan, are you going to talk? Maybe I'll just, as a way of introducing Ethan, what he's doing about the digitization. This was the most exciting part of our project. A man named Ernst Wust, around 1910, wrote a complete lexicon to Aristophanes, which he never published. And he actually wrote some notes about how it was going to be published. And then he said, nope, I haven't published it because somebody has staked a prior claim. And we don't know who that somebody was, but he never published a lexicon. There are indices of Aristophanes, but there's no lexicon. And so in 1984, somebody found them, had the manuscript of it, and published it on microfiche in manuscript form, and so that it would be preserved in case somebody someday wanted to transcribe it and read it. And you cannot read it on microfiche very easily. I'll show. You're going to show some examples, right? Ethan will show you that. So we are transcribing that, and now Wust's lexicon to Aristophanes for the first time will be able to be readable. We had troubles transcribing a printed copy of Plato, of the Asked lexicon to Plato. So you can imagine with, the handwritten copy of a manuscript of a lexicon to Aristophanes, that'd be a major problem. And it was. And so Ethan is going to talk about, that's our current project, what we're working on. Okay. So you want to go ahead and talk about that, and I'll turn it over to you.
If there aren't any immediate questions, I will admit I will apologize in advance because I will be looking away from the camera for this section because this has to be done on a separate computer. But what we've been using is this program, which is called Transcribus. So Transcribus is a program that can be used for the transcription of ancient documents, ancient by really any standard. It's mostly used for documents that are a little bit older than this manuscript, but it's perfectly reasonable for this as well. So this is one of the images from the microfiche of part of Wust's definition for ge. I am of the opinion at the very least that this is not the most legible. It's a mix of Greek, German definitions, the Latin titles for the different works. And while the images themselves are of very good quality, especially for a non-specialist reader, understanding the German and even understanding the Greek can be rather difficult. And the truly amazing part of Transcribus is it allows us to use technology to OCR handwritten texts. So Transcribus calls this technology HDR instead of OCR. So we can train a machine to come in and read the text for us. So if we look here down at the bottom, we have an example of this process. So what I'm showing you here is up on the top, we have the original microfiche. And down here, we have our transcription. We have our transcription of that line. And this was done by the machine. This was not handwritten or hand typed. This was completely done by the machine itself. And we were able to get the machine to do this by training a machine learning model. So there was a lot of human labor that went into this, where we had to transcribe about 100 pages or so of these sorts of images. But with that, we've been able to make different machine learning models that are able to take these images and create these OCR transcriptions. Now, these transcriptions are not yet perfect. And part of the difficulty, of course, with any manuscript like this is dealing with instances of interlinear lines, notes, and other sorts of addenda that get added over the course of editing. But we can use this as our base structure for transferring the core content of each definition without having to manually read every single one with a pretty high degree of accuracy. So our current model, which we're still working on improving, is represented by this curve here. And there are two important numbers, I guess, to look at. So CER stands for the character error rate. So out of 100 characters that are identified on the page, what percentage is the machine getting wrong, essentially? This model, which we've been currently working with has a validation set, which is the set that we care more about, error rate of about 7.21%. So right now, when we are facing a page like this, we can give it to the machine, and the model that we currently have will get about 93% of it correct. And it's currently our main focus is getting the machine good enough that it gets most of that last 7% as well. And generally, the way things go when training these sorts of models is it's that last 10% that requires 90% of the work. And this sort of correction process is very much what we're looking forward to doing, especially over the summer. And I can show other pages as well if people are interested, because I will admit this is definitely one of the most legible pages that we have from AST.
This is a breeze compared to a lot of.
Yes, and so we can take a look at some of those other pages as well. But I think I'll stop here in case there are any questions about what Transcribus is and the technology that's going on here as well.
You can use Transcribus. Go look it up. If you ever want to OCR something, just sign up. Sign up.
Yeah,
it's completely it's not completely non-technical, but you really don't have to do it's all just common sense. You get this interface and you get this very nice picture of your text. You have to load your text, and then you get this nice picture of it, and then then you have like hundreds of models to choose from.
Yeah.
The great thing about it is everybody, once you do your own model for your own text, it goes into the repertory of models, and everybody else can see what you did with it and how much success you had and try it out for themselves. And they can use it as the basis for their own model and make a new model. It's kind of a gathering, I don't know what you call it, a cascading force that just gets better and better all the time. And your own models, the more you transcribe, then you run new models and make your model better. And it means that the next pages you have to transcribe are even more accurate. So you can go faster and faster and faster.
And I will add quickly. So I talked earlier about the need for us to go back and correct some of ASC's OCR that we've done. So we've been using Transcribus for that process, using one of the pre-existing models that another project has created. And that model's error rate is about 1% or less. So we've been able to use those models to create extremely accurate OCRs of ASC lexicon. And while we probably won't get to a 1% error rate for our current model, it's definitely possible for us to bring down our error rate so that we create a very usable text.
Yeah, in our defense, this did not exist when we were doing the Plato.
Yes,
it was not around, so we used the best thing we could, which is Tesseract. Tesseract is considered the best multi-language OCR software. But wow, this is amazing. And by the way, if you look at this model, can you blow up the top part a little bit, expand it? The manuscript, yeah. Can you make it a little bit bigger?
I should be able to.
If you just oh yeah, right. Okay, you can make it bigger. You'll notice the German handwriting. The German handwriting is, for Americans, that's what's really hard to read. That's really hard to read. And does any of you read this, by the way, German handwriting? Oh, great. Can we sign you up? That's called Courant. Have you got experience with reading that, Jack? Oh, I'm sorry. I can't. You're muted.
I've read a lot of Suderlin. Same era. Right. Yeah. Just has more open letters. This is closer to what we would write in regular cursive.
Right. Wow. So this line, this first line here, for example, that's a line that you can make sense of, right?
Well, if I can get a glass
a bigger version, yeah.
So I see. Which line are we looking at?
Maybe this line where it says
orthos, tus. That's Greek. All right. So let's try to get to the German here.
There's some German here, for example.
Okay. All right. Let's look at that without the red. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So here you have. I have to get used to his handwriting, but anyway, das, D-A-S, that's a D-A-S set.
Right.
That. Okay, then I have to, let's see, this next word could be like I'd have to get used to the handwriting, but could be
That's a
a
W.
proper name, heart, maybe.
I think it's a W at the beginning.
All right, a vort. Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this could be the word hot, or is that
I think that's a P.
I think it's actually it might be an S, an ST.
Right, so then you have in there, in the.
Mm-hmm.
Then here we go. Do we have another W, or is that? I have to get used to the handwriting here.
Yeah.
So das. So then here we have. Okay, I have to. Okay,
actually,
that first character, could be SCH.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then we have some Greek, right?
Right. Yeah. And the Greek I find the easiest to read of all. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it's good Greek. Yeah.
The Greek is, and it's funny, the play titles. You notice the play titles? They're also very clear. They're abbreviations for things, but lice and ach and vesp, these are all abbreviations. So when he had to write Roman characters, when he had German to write in Roman characters, he switches into the German script, which is murder for me. But when he has to write play titles in Roman characters, he has a nice, clear Latin script.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, like Vesp. I'm looking down here. Further down.
Much easier to read.
So Jeff and Ethan, you're saying that if we have, say, old letters from our German great-grandfather or something that we can't read, we can use Transcribus to read them.
And actually, since it's based in Austria, that's actually its specialty. It's especially good at German handwriting.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of questions about it. And it's also easier, of course, because this is a lexicon. It's using this is the same grammatical terminology over and over again. Accusative, dative, verb, subject, object, active, passive, things like that. They're going to be a limited vocabulary. So, but still, it takes us forever to do this.
Yeah.
And you said we can help you with this as well. You said that we can become contributors. There are a lot of other questions that I can see. So maybe how can we also have to wrap up in a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is that
how can we join?
The Transcribus takes care of all but the most difficult cases. But the difficult cases are usually difficult in a ways a Greek student can solve, because you'll know what they're talking about. So there are quite a few puzzles. If you want to join the group, you can do it. Well, what I'd recommend is that you might just want to go to the Transcribus website and look at some of the videos that they have there. And this is called Transcribus Expert. Actually, what Ethan and I did a 5-hour workshop on Zoom with a woman, an Italian woman who works for them, Sara Mansuti. And she introduces it very clearly, and you might be able to find that introduction there. But so, for example, if you want to digitize an article or something, first you have to turn it into a JPEG, and load that. But once you load the JPEG and you find the right model, then you can, it'll do it. Like the other day, I had an article. This is Proctor.
This is text in German, that's the model I'm choosing, or this is a text in Italian, so I'm choosing.
Right, and it'll tell you how successful they are. It is a bit of an investment in time to learn how to do it. Like this interface has so many features, you'll see. But if you're interested, and of course, the great thing about it is it does multiple languages. It can do, and it's using artificial intelligence, which I don't understand, except I do understand that they're working to some extent on the word level, not just on the character level.
Yeah.
And so when it trains, sometimes it takes a long time to train a new model.
The main focus is word level, but also reading lines as whole lines, as opposed to trying to break up the line into individual pieces. That's been the most successful part of the technology, is my understanding.
Yeah.
And just to talk about the models, so I put in a search for current, for example, and these are all the different models that exist for different types of current.
On the left here.
On the left. So depending on what specific type of current you need or something like that, you can look at the different models, see their error rates, see how well suited or not well suited they are to your needs, and select from there. For your own process.
So kind of like, this is a very basic example, but if you want to translate something using Google Translate, you say, this text is in Czech, so please translate from Czech to target language. You have to tell it
exactly
the basics.
You'll use this to transcribe it first, and then you'll transcribe it, and then you use Google Translate to translate it. Won't translate it for you.
Right. In terms of choosing a model, I guess I mean. That's how you have to know a bit about what you're doing.
But this is something we're working on now, and we're actually going to talk about this at the SCS. Well, I hope we're going to talk about it at the SCS meeting in January too. Maybe by that time we'll be done. Who knows? But it's 1,500 pages long, this manuscript, and it took. And I don't. By the way, we didn't just use the microfiche. I spent a month in the library of 8-hour days. With a microfiche reader printer that cost like $10,000, changing the settings to try and get the best combination of brightness and magnification. So it was a slog, I'll tell you. And then transcribing the first 50 or 100 pages was another slog. We did over December and January. That was hard work, but the idea that it's never been published, and what's more, did I mention the manuscript is lost? The original manuscript is lost. So
have you contacted De Gruyter?
We contacted De Gruyter. They are the successor of Sauer, the original publisher, and they never answered us because they may have the rights to it. But we got better. We got better answers from Mr. Sauer, who is still alive. Konrad Sauer is still alive, the man who published it. And he said, "Oh, it's great that you're doing this. I have no idea where the manuscript is." And the other person we've been in touch with is the granddaughter of Ernst Wust. And she says, "It's great that you're doing this. I have no idea where the manuscript is." She said her grandfather would have been very pleased. Ernst, all of these authors, by the way, Béton and Ast, and I know I'm running out of time here. Béton, Ast, and Wust, they all have very interesting stories. We got interested in their stories because we wanted to find out what methods they used, putting these lexica together. And the only way we could do that is by getting into their bios a little bit. And Ast had an incredibly interesting biography, very sad in many ways. But he was, Friedrich Ast actually was in the midst of, in 1800, he went to the University of Jena, which was the birth of the Romantic poetry and philosophy movement. And he was there, and he hung out with Hegel and the Schlegels and Schleiermacher and Schelling and Schilling and all these different people. And he was in the midst of it. And for the rest of his life, he had a very swelled head about what a great philosopher he was. And he was cut off at the knees numerous times by people who said, "No, you're not." We're trying to put together, Ethan and I are trying to put together an article about him and his lexicon because it's very interesting. Wust's life is also very interesting. He was not a Nazi, and he was the only non-Nazi in the Munich classics department at the end of the war. So he was made the director of the department. And after the war, he didn't have to undergo denazification. So he was a major figure in the education ministry. There's a little short bio of him. So we're still learning more about him, but he did this whole lexicon and he never published it, and it evidently didn't bother him. So, but I have to say it's a great lexicon, but there's been a lot done in Aristophanes in 115 years since he did it. So it needs some updating, but it's still really, really good. Sorry, I'll stop there.
Well, looking at the time, I should issue one last call for a question, perhaps. But I know that we'll all be using this. I hope we'll all be using this next time we look at Thucydides or Plato or Aristophanes. Jack, I think I hear you.
Yeah, I looked up Hadrios in the online version. I remember looking it up years ago, and in LSJ it was said it was like a plover, and it's obviously a bird, Hadrios mimuminos, and I saw the online version defined it as a curlew, and I was wondering, is that from Vus, like a translation of Vus German, or is that an updated translation based on some later research?
Is it agrios?
Hadra with a he. Hadrios. It's in the birds. Hadrios mimuminos, and apparently it's sort of proverbial, imitating the Hadrios. Means like being a very voracious eater.
Right. Well, one of the things that appeared after Wust's lexicon was the great Glossary of Greek Birds by Darcy Thompson. And there is somebody digitizing that at Tufts, Marie Beaulieu. And she is doing a digitization of that. That's a lexicon too. And so I'm hoping that there's a lot of birds in Aristophanes in particular. So I'm hoping that'll be one of the updates we can make, is at least references to Darcy Thompson. But at the moment, we don't have anything there. We just have the basic curlew definition. Yeah. Sorry, Aileen, you have a question? Or do we have to? Oh, yes.
No, go ahead. Yeah. Aileen, do you have a question?
No, well, thank you. First, thank you, Jeff, for this wonderful presentation. Thank you, Ethan, also. And no, I was just wondering, I see that you are translating the German into English for Aristophanes. This is quite it will take you a long time, I think, but yeah. But are you going to do also the translation from Latin to English for the Asked Plato, the lexicon, the Asked lexicon of Plato? Are you going to do the same, or?
Well, first of all, the translation, we're doing it as we can, and we're starting with the articles that we're most interested in. So the idea, this is actually a joint project. If you go to, it's a kind of a group. What do you call it? When you get a whole bunch of people, a crowdsourced project, except it's crowdsourced with people who know a lot of ancient Greek and who know Latin and so on, and the authors. So it's a smaller crowd. But one of the second and third screencasts for Thucydides explain how you can sign up to become a contributor. And there's an article builder where you can do your own versions of articles, and that explains that. And we haven't been focusing on that. We've been focusing on getting the most accurate and new lexica possible. But that's definitely in the cards for this. So people who want to help in any way at all on that would be very welcome. And the other thing is, as far as Ast goes, the one thing that Ast's claim to fame is that his Latin was incredibly beautiful. When he was like 20 years old, he was distinguished at Jena for his knowledge of spoken Latin, kind of like Paideia today, There are certain people whose Latin is just, one of my colleagues, Dan Gallagher, can speak Latin so beautifully. It's unbelievable. and he was secretary and one of the secretaries of Latin for the Pope, and so Ast was like that, and so his Latin, even the people who thought he was an idiot said, yes, but he's an idiot who can write beautiful Latin. They actually said that in print. And so his translations of Plato into Latin are the one good part of his work. And the lexicon, the Latin of the lexicon, I think you'll look at it, you'll find it's quite elegant. And I think it would be rather difficult to translate adequately into English. I mean, we could try, but it's he has whole phrases sometimes to translate things.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay.
All right. Well, Ethan, thank you. Jeff, thank you. Always good to talk with you. Thanks everyone for attending. Thanks to all you out there.
Please.
I will see you.
Thank you
next time.
For having us. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, we're off the air.